Hey Dan. Wow. There have been so many great instructional strategies presented at this trade fair.
Hi Lindsay. I am glad you have been enjoying it.
Case-based learning. I have never heard of that. Can you tell me a little about it?
I would be happy to. Let's picture a typical classroom. Typical lectures provide students with the content they need to work in a given field. They are gambling that when their students go out into the real world, they will be able to figure out how to apply this information.
So how is case-based learning different?
Case-based learning brings the real world into the classroom in the form of a case. Cases are stories that highlight a specific learning objective. Students learn about real situations that they will need to apply their knowledge to, and that also helps them remember the content better.
Isn't this problem-based learning?
Great question. The two are very similar. Case-based learning, as the facilitator, provide learning objectives for the students, and the instructor helps to guide the students to those objectives. In problem-based learning, the students are the ones who determine their own objective while trying to solve a problem.
Can you give me a quick example of case-based learning, so that I can wrap my head around it?
Okay. Say that you are teaching a lesson in medical school. You want to teach your students to differentiate between 3 respiratory diseases that have similar symptoms. You could lecture them about the disease, or you could use case-based learning and give them the case of Mary. Mary has been feeling short of breath for several days, with today being the worst. Her respiration sounds like a whistle when she breathes out, and she has a dry cough. The case about Mary could include her physical appearance, any blood work done, her medication list, and so on. The students will use this information to ask questions and eventually try and determine what is causing Mary's shortness of breath.
I get it. So instead of just talking about a disease, you tell a story about a person with that disease.
It sounds like you have got the basics down.
Hi Dan. I could not help but overhear your conversation. I was wondering, what are the key features of case-based learning?
No problem, Mike. As educators, we want to prepare our students as much as possible for their future careers. To do this, we need to promote the application of knowledge. This is a big strength of case-based learning. We tend to forget lists and PowerPoint presentations. Stories, however, stay with us. If you think back to the last PowerPoint presentation you saw, I am sure you cannot remember all of the details. But if you try to remember the details of the last movie you saw, I am sure that you can remember a lot about it. This is because people are very good at remembering stories. Before the invention of writing, stories were used to pass down information from generation to generation.
That is an excellent point. I have never thought of it like that. Is there any other features to case-based learning?
Case-based learning can also give students workable experience by showing them how an expert would handle a specific real-world situation. Another feature is that it is learner-centered. It forces students to make decisions and apply the knowledge that they have learned.
Are you not neglecting the course content by just telling stories in class?
The case is just to give the students a context. The real learning comes from the discussion around the case. Cases force the students to make decisions and discover their own answers.
Interesting. What are the intended learning goals for using case-based learning?
There are several. The first one is to promote the students' transition from novice to expert. By students developing higher-order thinking skills and teamwork, they learn to think like an experienced practitioner. Case-based learning also promotes the awareness of multiple perspectives and solutions to any given problem. Students quickly learn that there are not always right or wrong answers. The last learning goal is to have students take more responsibility for their learning.
Which learning domains are addressed with this strategy?
Cognitive is the most obvious answer. Students need to problem solve, acquire knowledge, and apply information in order to answer questions around a case. Another domain that might not be immediately obvious is the affective domain. Students will have to face their classmates and their own personal attitudes and biases.
So case-based learning forces students to deal with both emotional and cognitive situations.
Exactly.
What are the underlying theories upon which this strategy has been developed?
Case-based learning has a long history of use. It was utilized in law school as early as the late 1800s. It is based on the constructivist orientation, as it focuses on providing physical experiences that induce cognitive conflict, and hence encourage learners to develop new knowledge schemes that are better adapted to experience. It also falls in line with David Merrill's first principles of instruction, which believes that learning is promoted when the learner is engaged in the application of newly acquired knowledge.
This all sounds great. How would I implement this strategy in my classroom?
The first step is to identify specific learning objectives for your students. From that, you will have to write or find a case that highlights those objectives.
What makes a good case?
First, it should be conflict-provoking, with no obvious correct answer. It should force the students to make decisions. Second, it should be balanced with the student's prior knowledge level. It should also have some sort of generality so that this information will be useful again for the students.
Is there anything else you need to prepare prior to class?
You'll want to map out specific questions, answers, and tangents that you expect will come out during the discussion, so that you are prepared for them.
Would you have the students do anything prior to class?
Because we are not directly providing content, it is important for students to come to class with the information beforehand in order to understand the case. This means that they may have to do pre-readings and answer some preliminary questions.
How does class start?
At the start of class you will introduce the case. There are 5 typical stages of case analysis. What is the situation? What are the possibilities for action? What are the consequences of each? What action, then, should be taken? What general principles and concepts can be extrapolated from these answers?
What does the teacher have to do during the discussion?
The teacher is making note of the key points made throughout the lesson, either on the board or in their head.
In case-based learning, do you only use discussion?
Discussion is a big part of case-based learning, but it is not the only part. Students can be put into groups to work out specific problems. They can also be assigned research in class that will help them put the pieces together.
How do you end the session?
In the last 10 to 15 minutes, there is a debrief of all of the points that were made and agreed upon. This helps the students connect the ideas to the bigger picture.
What is the criteria for successful implementation of this strategy?
The main thing is to have all students participate. There are several ways to successfully implement this. First, arrange the classroom so that the students can see each other. Consider name tags if the students are not familiar with each other. The second crucial part is creating the climate in the classroom to encourage engagement. Get the students comfortable talking to each other through icebreakers. You can also demonstrate a mini case to get them familiar with the process. The type of questions you ask will determine the difficulty of the case, so case-based learning can be adjusted to ease the students into the process.
So is there a learning curve with this strategy?
There are actually 2. The first curve is the process of students going from hesitant to active learning. At first it is important for the instructor to give softball questions to the students so that they can get used to answering questions and see that they will be respected. Then as the students increase in confidence, the teacher can push them harder by giving them more challenging questions.
Can you give an example of a more challenging question?
An example could be asking the students how they came to the conclusion. This will force students to probe more deeply into where they get their information and opinions.
What is the second learning curve?
The second curve is completing the content goals of the course. The great thing about case-based learning is how it weaves these 2 learning curves together. The student gains not only proficiency in the subject matter, but also develops skills in problem solving, analyzing, and teamwork.
When would you not use this instructional strategy?
Case-based learning is not always appropriate for introductory level classes. This is because students often need a good deal of background knowledge in order to participate. Time restraints also need to be considered. You might not always have sufficient time to explore a case and reach your objectives.
So why is case-based learning relevant to adult education?
Well, from several studies we know that traditional lectures still remain the dominant form of teaching. In a study at one university economic program, 83% of in-class time was spent lecturing to students. Although it is important for these students to learn the facts about economics, when these students enter the workforce much of their job will be in the application of these facts. By designing a program with case-based learning, these students would be able to gain valuable experience while also learning the content.
This sounds so awesome. Where can I find more information about case-based learning?
Check out the resources thread for more information. There are some great papers and videos to watch to show you how you can implement case-based learning in your classroom. Thanks so much for stopping by my booth. Enjoy the rest of the conference.